Hello, a very warm welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Nakma. With me is Professor Harsh Pant. This week, we are going to primarily focus on China and its ever increasing assertiveness in many areas, be it Xi Jinping's official visit to Tibet or Taiwan or China's rejection of the WHO's proposal to kind of investigate the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. All of that points toward an ever increasing aggressiveness on China's part. Uh, Harsh, a very warm welcome to you, and I would like to begin by talking about Xi Jinping's first official visit to Tibet and what does it signify and what does the timing signify. It comes amidst an increasing tension between China and India. The border tension continues, and it's clearly a troubling message for India. How do you see this when China has forever been saying that it gives religious freedom to Tibet and the autonomy, but there we see an ever increasing aggressiveness, just like we have seen in Xinjiang. What do you make of the timing and the message that comes out from Xi Jinping's visit to Tibet?
Thanks, Nagma. I think this visit and the symbolism surrounding the visit is pretty interesting because this is Jiang Zemin had visited it in 1990, I think, and after that this is the first visit by a Chinese president to Tibet, and I think the message is clearly for multiple constituencies. You have international interlocutors, you have domestic constituencies, you have Tibetans themselves who are being given a certain kind of a message by the Chinese president, and the message is should be looked at in the context of growing hardline tendencies in Beijing vis-a-vis Tibet. I mean, if you see Xi Jinping's approach, he has increased state control over Tibet by multiple means. And the message also, he was quite unapologetic about it. While he emphasized the Tibetan culture, he was also quite clear that ultimately the socialist path is the one that Tibetans should be taking, and they have to move towards that, and how the Communist Party can guide Tibetans towards their redemption almost. I know that those kind of sentiments. The idea, of course, it should also be looked at in the context of the Communist Party celebrating its centenary. You know, China itself celebrating 70 years of its control over Tibet, which is quite significant, I think, from a symbolic point of view. And the message that is going out is, of course, that Tibet remains very much under Chinese control, and any attempt to rake it up, any attempt to raise the issue will have consequences for Tibetans, for whoever tries to do it. And I think the larger idea that the developmental process that China has initiated in Tibet is the only antidote to Tibetan secessionism. That's something that the Chinese Communist Party has always emphasized. Remains the mantra that Xi Jinping pointed out, and the fact that he is increasingly militarizing Tibet is also something to be concerned about for India, for the rest of the world, for Tibetans themselves. And of course, there is a coming crisis brewing over the succession issue of who will be the next Dalai Lama. So there are multiple issues here, and I think the symbolism was interesting. It was for Tibetans, of course, is that I am in control, Communist Party is in control. For international community, that China will brook no dissent, China will brook no interference. And of course, one point that I want to make here is also that this also comes against the backdrop of, as mentioned, deteriorating ties between India and China. And the Tibet issue has always been at the center of the core of this relationship. And of course, Prime Minister Modi sending out wishes to the Dalai Lama has also stirred up some sentiments in China as to what India might be about. So clearly, the focus was on making it clear that China has no. The only way China sees for Tibet is to move along the direction that the Communist Party has set for itself and for Tibet, and there is no brooking of any kind of dissent, whether from Tibetans or from outsiders.
Absolutely. It comes just 2 weeks after the Prime Minister wished the Dalai Lama. And like you said, he spoke about bolstering construction along that border, along the Tibet Himalayan frontier. He it just shows that the whole border tension is at the top of Chinese national agenda. Because Tibet is a priority and it is of great significance. Now, when we, China has spoken of autonomy and freedom and emphasized on, but this time the visit really re-emphasized that the Tibetans owe everything that they have to the Chinese, to the communist Chinese, to the Communist Party. So all that freedom and autonomy talk was at the back burner, which earlier has been China's stand, and now it was all about the Communist Party and how Tibet owes everything to it, and 70 years of control over Tibet.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there is, I don't think the world should be in any doubt about this issue of freedom and autonomy. I mean, even Dalai Lama, has been talking of autonomy. After all, he's not talking of freedom. He has been long saying that I want to have a
He said the
conversation.
social and religious freedom, at least, like the
Absolutely.
oppression in Xinjiang that we see, the same thing is happening in Tibet, of course.
Yes, I mean that seems to be a model that is being followed in all the areas where you have minorities in some ways, and China's approach has been not only to militarize these zones, but also going all the way in terms of forced labor camps. We have had reports about that even in Tibet, much along the lines of Xinjiang. So which China has refuted, but clearly the model that China is following, China feels it has been successful. It has been successful in Xinjiang. It can also be successful in Tibet. I think the problem with Tibet has always been that from the very beginning it had been an international issue, because of course you have a government in exile in India, and I think the way a lot of the world looks at the Tibet issue through that lens of the Dalai Lama has made it very difficult for China uh, you know uh, to sort of make the kind of claims that they do in the case of, for example, Xinjiang. But I think increasingly what they are telling the world, and that look what we've done to Tibet. We are, it was a backward part of our country. Now it is. We are modernizing it. We are developing it. We are bringing it up to speed, from infrastructure to economic development. That is what we are bringing. That kind of prosperity is something that eventually all Tibetans would desire, and therefore all this talk of autonomy, religious freedoms or social freedoms is something that is not really important for Tibetans who are in Tibet at the moment, and that's a message they want to convey. Of course, you have others who will refute it. You will have especially the government in exile, who continues to project the voice of Tibetans around the world. But as far as I think China is concerned, they no longer see it necessary to even do lip service to this idea of freedom and autonomy and certain kinds of freedoms that Tibetans should enjoy. If you look at the statement that Xi Jinping made when he visited Tibet, he mentioned Tibetan culture, but immediately he mentioned also the fact that this has to be looked in a broader context. That this is all about China, that the national rejuvenation. This is all about how assimilation is the larger policy, and how the idea of Communist Party guiding Tibet towards that ideal end state is something that he emphasized. So what you see is greater restrictions, greater control, state control, greater militarization, greater the attempt of building infrastructure, of course, both for military movement as well as to show the world that they are doing incredible things in Tibet. But I think the larger issue remains that you have a very militarized Tibet at the moment, and this is something that will cause grave concerns in India, and it will also, I think, continue to shape the discourse on Sino-Indian relations in a way that perhaps we thought would eventually disappear. We are not. I don't think we are looking at a future trajectory where China will give up what it is right now doing in Tibet. And I think so long as that happens, so long as that hardline posture continues, India will find it extremely difficult to navigate these very stormy times with China. And therefore, I think willy-nilly you will have Tibet, which will keep cropping up in Sino-Indian relations. And as you know, there is a lot of push in India from several quarters that India should be relooking at one China policy, that India should be relooking at certain aspects of the commitment that India has given. After all, if China can renege on all its commitments, why can't India? So I think those questions have been opened up in the Indian political and foreign policy discourse at the moment.
Absolutely, it remains a big concern for India, and it will continue to guide Sino-Indian relations. And we see China's aggressiveness in other regions as well. Harsh, look at Taiwan. What's happening there? I mean, maybe it was an extremist fringe comment that came out, which went viral. But the talk of nuking Japan over Taiwan, if Japan continues to protect Taiwan's sovereignty, was a big thing. And also, we've seen the assertiveness, the aggressiveness that, or Chinese aggressiveness in that area. So, but how do we see this? There's pressure mounting on Taiwan, of course, because of its strategic location in the Indo-Pacific, and it is also said and understood that whoever is in control of Taiwan, I mean, if China is trying to control Taiwan, also controls the Indo-Pacific. It's very, very strategically located there. So, how do we see this comment? It could have been a fringe extremist comment, but still, it just shows. And also, we have examples of China's aggressiveness there.
Oh yes, I think it may have been a fringe comment, but I think it was a comment that underscored the point that China is repeatedly making, that that on the issue of Taiwan there can't be any compromise. And as far as China is concerned, Taiwan is at the heart of its foreign policy, national security strategy, and that it will continue to look at Taiwan, the reunification, eventual reunification with Taiwan as one of the essential goals. And I think Xi Jinping may just be also in a hurry to do that. And therefore, at the moment, we are at a very critical stage when it comes to the Taiwan crisis, or Taiwan problem, because we are looking at it through the prism of Xi Jinping's personal agenda. There is also the greater contestation among between US and China on multiple issues, on Tibet in particular, because I think, oh sorry, on Taiwan in particular, because Taiwan, is something that resonates in America. There is America is committed to defending Taiwan. So clearly, the issues as far as Taiwan is concerned are hotting up. They are heating up, and Japan, interestingly, came out with this white paper, where it the defense white paper, where it talked about Taiwan for the first time. The Taiwan Straits and how they look at the stability in those straits is very important for Tokyo. Now, that is something that has actually that angered the Chinese, and they made it very clear by using the N word, the nuclear word, that eventually. They would go all out when it comes to defending Taiwan, and Japan and other countries have no business talking about the Taiwan issue. Now, unfortunately, I think what has happened over the last year and a half for China is that Taiwan has taken a center stage in global politics that it did not have before. More countries are talking about Taiwan. There is a general appreciation of how Taiwan has stood up to China all these years at a time when other countries are trying to do the same. And so now I think there is a greater appreciation of Taiwan and how Taiwan has managed to build a wonderful economic infrastructure, at the same time managing to remain outside China's direct control. And therefore, when a lot of countries look at now navigating their relations with China, they look at Taiwan with great degree of admiration. The way Taiwan has conducted itself during this COVID-19 crisis as well. So I think there is a lot of sympathy. There is a lot of Taiwan at the moment, and that in a way, I think that is something that China is feeling restless about, because for the first time they are finding that their coercive tactics are actually not that effective. Yes, more and a lot of the countries do not actually recognize Taiwan, but I think if you look at the way the West is changing its tone on Taiwan, the way there is a greater ambition in certain countries to have a more broader relationship with Taiwan, I think those issues are cropping up in ways that they were not cropping up before. And that is something that Chinese are worried about. And therefore, there is that desperation perhaps is also showing in their language.
So there's desperation over Taiwan, and like you said, there is increasing appreciation of Taiwan also about its role in managing the COVID-19 crisis. And at the same time, there's a reaction from the West against China and its role in the COVID-19 pandemic. And now China has rejected WHO's proposal. That again shows the aggressiveness or Chinese behavior, which is not acceptable in the international community. But China has rejected the proposal, and at the same time said that actually the US should be investigated about the COVID-19 crisis. So it's pushing back there, but it is a big problem for any international probe to happen. So that assertiveness there. We've also seen the US-China sanctions regarding Hong Kong, because China has sanctioned 7 of US people there, including former Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. Just because America warned some of its citizens that they should be careful about the fallouts of the national security laws that were imposed there by China. So we see this kind of aggressiveness everywhere. It's all about China now.
Yes, I think increasingly the conversations are becoming dominated by what China is or is not doing in most of these crises areas, in most of these platforms, about most of these international institutions. But I think the WHO issue is particularly important because here it is not simply about China. It is about a larger global order issue. This is an issue of how you manage global governance, and in this case, if you do not, we are looking at a country that is that is a rising power, that is almost dismissive of the role that perhaps WHO can play in bringing out information that perhaps will be needed for managing a crisis like COVID-19 in the future. And Chinese complete rejection of the second stage of WHO's investigation into the origins of COVID-19 is a serious setback. Let's remember that the first investigation actually was not much of an investigation because China did not participate effectively, did not provide all the raw data that was necessary. And so the conclusions have been mired in all kinds of controversies. Now, when WHO wants to do an audit of the laboratories around Wuhan, around the area where the virus originated, China has pushed back, saying this is not, we will not allow this to happen. And in fact, China is saying that they have given a set of recommendations to WHO on how to conduct its proceedings. So I think this assumption that even on an issue which is a relatively softer issue, right? It's not a
Yeah.
military issue. It's not a hard security issue. It's a soft security issue, global health, where it's not from a larger vantage point, it's a win-win. It should have been a win-win situation if countries were cooperating on this investigation, because we all want to know what happened, and therefore so that we can prevent another crisis from emerging in the future. But China's rejection of this tells you how dismissive it is of international institutions, and how dismissive it is of any attempt to bring it to bring the larger issues around COVID-19 to light. And that, I think, creates a lot of apprehensions about China's role as a global power. So China's rise itself, is a problem for many countries, as we are discussing here in India. But I think the larger issue is also about global governance. What kind of a global order are we entering into, where you have a major power that is completely dismissive of the institutional fabric that exists? It may be ineffective, it may be inefficient, but that's the only thing we have got. If we are not willing to work with those institutions, then at the end of the day, all of us will find that the costs are rising, and the costs, those costs will make it even more difficult to have a kind of a global governance or a global order that would be beneficial to all countries. So I think that is the larger challenge that China is posing increasingly. And of course, bilaterally, as you mentioned, they are going all out in terms of when it comes to America, in particular, tit for tat sanctions. In fact, it comes before the visit of Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman's visit to China, which will be the first high-level visit from any member of the Biden administration to China. And they have, I think, that the larger reality that pervades the international system at the moment is that the US-China geopolitical competition is actually not going away, even under Biden, and may even be intensifying under him.
Absolutely. Afghanistan continues to be on the boil. There have been US has claimed that it has helped Afghanistan government by conducting certain airstrikes in Kandahar and Helmand. But we do not really have enough time on this episode, Harsh, to discuss Afghanistan, and it is a problem that we shall be discussing in the future episodes. But just a quick question, which is concerning Afghanistan from one of our viewers, that China and Pakistan have tried to restrict India to South Asia by keeping regional stability on the boil. India has tried to tackle this through mechanisms like Act East and Indo-Pacific. How will the Afghanistan instability be a roadblock to increasing Indian influence in Central Asia or Asian hinterland? And at the same time, if you would like to add on, what happened recently in Afghanistan, government has claimed Taliban has killed about 100 civilians, airstrikes have taken place. So what should come next in a country which is on the precipice?
Well, it's Afghanistan is really going to be the most pressing problem that perhaps the international community will face in the in the coming days and months ahead. But I think for India, this is a first order priority at the moment, given the kind of instability that is brewing, given that there is no roadmap at the moment, and I think the way Americans have managed it so far. Is also not very effective, because we are witnessing the trend that the withdrawal that could have been more orderly perhaps has completely gone awry. Now that Americans are saying we are using air power, it really amounts to nothing, because if these aspects were kept in mind during the withdrawal process, I think we would have had a better end game perhaps. But that's not the mood in the politics, in the domestic politics in America. We have to live with that, and the regional countries trying to salvage it, including India, is something that is going to be very rocky ahead, because as I think the question mentions, there is a China Pakistan issue, and there is a issue of other countries as well. You have Russia, you have Iran, all of them engaged at multiple levels when it comes to Afghanistan, but no one really has a framework which can give us a road ahead that is devoid of conflict. And that is the real challenge, where both Taliban are now will now even go further in terms of fighting, because they have now realized that Americans will support the Afghan government to an extent possible. And you will have an Afghan government that will always be on tenterhooks, because they would never know when Americans will support them and when they won't. So I think we are looking
Absolutely.
at a very uncertain stage in Afghanistan's evolution. And hopefully, Secretary of State Blinken's visit next week to India would clarify for New Delhi some of these issues, which are clearly very high on Indian foreign policy agenda at the moment.
Yeah. Yes, of course. We're looking at a very unstable region in the near future, at least. And Taliban has termed the American airstrikes as violation of a signed agreement. But at the same time, after Ghani's statements about going, he spoke of an offensive during Eid against the Taliban. The Taliban have also said or rejected Ghani's rule and said that there will be no ceasefire before a new government actually forms or takes shape in Afghanistan. So this problem continues there. We have time for this much or discussion on this episode of the Ideas Factory, but we will take more questions on the next episode, and we shall be looking at Afghanistan in greater details. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Harsh.